end of year stuff, for the most part, we're talking about what are kind of the typical recommendations the Anthology has. There's going to be stuff that your accountant, maybe your insurance person, you never know, type people want, details. They want numbers. They want that information. End of year, probably, what is it, this Friday? Oh, goodness. So end of close Friday night, or even maybe Saturday morning, or, if your the stores are open or different, even, the Monday, Tuesday following. It's not written in stone. There is one report, if you can. It would be best to run it at a kind of that little window, but again, it's not end of the world if you don't. So the report that we most often recommend everybody run is the one called inventory status. This is one that is the value of your inventory at the moment you run it. It is not retroactive, meaning in April, if somebody remembers, oops, I didn't run it in a year, can I get the value of my inventory as it was on December 31st, having running it later? Not really, not exactly. That's what this report is. It's kind of a big calculation and a snapshot. So in fact, this is a report I recommend that gets run probably every month anyway, can't hurt. That way you just kind of have a nice little snapshot in time of what was the calculated value of inventory in the Anthology at that time. And you can run this report a couple of different ways. You can do a very detailed report where you're seeing every line item, each SKU, and the various units on hand, and margin, markup, all that good stuff. Or you could do more of a summary. Maybe you want just 1 or 2 pages that are maybe by section, department, a couple of different ways. So I'll show you both methods, and there's a few in-betweens too. You can do other things like maybe only want to look within a particular section, other things like that. So this first run, excuse me, is the detailed show me everything. The many, many pages probably don't want to print, probably save it to an Excel file, that excess of information. I'm going to set this screen up as if, just run it right through and maybe sort it by author first, and then maybe title. And you can see there's a primary, secondary, and tertiary fields for the sorting. So that's 3 levels of sorting you can do. So let's maybe do author, description, excuse me, let's do maybe section. Well, let's do description. I'll keep it simple, but I could do 3 layers deep if I wanted, but I'll just stick with that for the moment. They're not section, we want description. Excuse me. There we go. So I do want it to show me everything on hand. I don't necessarily want to limit it to say only show me things that have a positive on hand. If you want to just make sure you get everything, can't hurt just leave this guy unchecked. Same thing, I could limit it by on order, but in this case, I just want everything, including not just the sort of the title information, but I also want to know the extra information of what was the second SKU. Maybe you do, colors of socks as your second SKU or something like that. And I also want to include the cost basis. Not everybody wants that, so we added that as an option you can turn on and off. I do, in probably 90% of the cases, want to use the condensed form. That's really just shorthand for it's going to look easier to read on the screen and if you did print it out. And then I want it set to detail on this detail summary area. And I just tend to leave save settings turned on just so I have that kind of memorized where I want. So this, if I do this pass, when I do F11 print, and sorry, my husband just got home from work, so he'll make some noise. He'll figure it out pretty quick. But I'm going to go ahead and preview this report. Let me just scooch that over so you can see, what that window looks like. So I'm going to say print preview it, and this is going to be lots of pages long. In fact, if I jump to the very last page, and bear in mind this is testing inventory, so it's not massive, by any means. It's still 177 pages, so yours could be several hundreds of pages. But if I just kind of bounce back and look around, I can see that's my listing sorted by author, lots of items that don't have an author, and then I start getting into sorted by author, and then that do have a title. Not the best. Let me find some pages with the author. Let's see, I'll just do the jump to let's go to like page 75. There we go. So sorted by author, and you can see up at the very top a couple of details that in case you do print it or save it to a PDF too, that's another one. You'll have a note of when you ran it and what were the controls. So this one I just did totals by author and description, a detailed listing versus a summary. So I've got it set to show me the author, the description, or sorted by description. It does have it set to include the SKU too. And then here's all those dollar amounts where we're showing you the list price of the item itself, the singular unit, the retail price, your extended list, extended retail, extended list being the number of units on hand times the list price. And then same thing for the retail. The extended retail is the retail unit price times your on hand amount. And then cost basis, that is using sort of FIFO excuse me, or actually in this case maybe LIFO, but I can get that specific calculation information out a little bit later. But the cost basis is essentially going to be using normal calculation costing rules. We will count back through the receiving history, find what was the likely receiving memo that item was on, and then use the list price on that receiving memo kind of in hand and pull if there was a vendor discount, pull that information and calculate, what is the approximate cost or value rather of your current inventory for the moment you ran this report. And you can see in my data, I have lots of zero items, so maybe I should run this a little bit differently with hiding the zero on-hand items because they don't have a value. In fact, that'll give me a much smaller report. Let me do that real quick. Let's just say anything with 1 or over. That should give me quite a bit shorter report. So if I go to, let's say maybe page 50 or 15, so yeah, much shorter report. So here's some good pictures, and if I can get my screen to blow up a little bit more, we might be able to just kind of eyeball and see, is there a few titles in here that, like you, as you're running through your report, you might look at that and go, wow, that's totally wrong. Why is it showing my cost is way more than what I expected to be or less, as well as sort of the overall value of my inventory, kind of grand total. But as I kind of look through this report, just seeing if there's any that look kind of strange, like maybe this one that I see, it's a cost basis rather value of $45. I've got 5 units on hand, $15 each. Does that kind of line up with the approximate discount I expected from Random House being a paperback in the book department? And that kind of jumps into maybe the next little portion is to look at this in a summary view. Like while I'm getting that screen set up, I will kind of open the floor for a moment, or if you wanted to type in the chat window, is there any particular spot need like a little more detail at this point on the detailed view of the inventory status report? And a couple of people that might have joined us at the end too, welcome. We're just kind of getting over starting the basics. True, yep. Kind of get these little controls. I've got a little side panel view. I don't know if yours it'll show it to you or not. All right, so I'll kind of blink that little chat window so if it'll show up on your screen. All right, so the view we were just looking at was a detailed view, and having first run it with everything, even the ones that were zero on hand, I had 170 some odd pages. When I limited it to just items that did have an on hand amount, I had about, I think, 15 pages. Still maybe a little bit long than what I want, so maybe I want more of a summary. And I often do the summary as the sort of my end of month stash in a file drawer if I print it, or save it off to my, my backup drive that I've stashed things like what was the value for April, May, June, and whatnot. Excuse me. I also could run this a few different ways. A lot of times when folks are starting to kind of do that annual, or maybe more often, is the information in the system correct? Am I showing the right value? Whoops, I didn't get a discount that day. That happens. Or you didn't find out until, gosh, months later sometimes, that you didn't get the discount you thought you did that was entered at the time when you received it. Easy enough. You can go back to the sort of the history of the receiving to correct any of those discounts, dollar amount type details that maybe weren't correct earlier on. Those kinds of questions tend to come up in the next couple of weeks as folks are starting to look at their end of year reports and see, do the numbers jive? So often we'll get those questions, and doing things like running the inventory status report in a summary view at first, just to kind of get a top level bird's eye view to see, wait a minute, that department or that section, something's not right. The discount is way off. I should have much better margin on that one. I tend to look at it from a top-down view, maybe focus on a summary report, and then start delving into a little bit further. Okay, now I want to delve into my science fiction section, and maybe even on an author level, I want to look at my Stephen King titles because I know I've got a big promo coming up with him later. So let's look at this report as if we're going to do a summary, and you can do it all sorts of ways, but I tend to see folks do things like department and section, maybe publisher, certainly an option. And bear in mind, when we say publisher here, this is the publisher on the inventory record, not necessarily the vendor that might have been on the actual receiving memo itself, because those could be two different things. Like buying Chronicle items that you end up paying Hachette for. So I'll set this to do summaries on these 3 levels, and I don't really care about the SKU 2 at this point. I do want the cost basis. I want to see summary. Again, I like using the condensed form, and then we can do the F11 print. And right now I've got it set to show me all departments, all media. I could fine tune it even further and say, I just want to look in my new book department, and then from there, but we'll just do a quick all for the moment. This should give me maybe 1 or 2 pages in this case. So I wish I could blow this screen up a little bit more. Too much more and it starts getting fuzzy. Oops. Zoom that a little bit better. So, and here again, same idea. We date stamp, time stamp the report so you know when you ran it, and then we show sort of the highlights of what your settings were at the time. Now let me scroll over a little bit. So you can see I've got some items in my inventory, almost 1,000, not bad. That have no publisher on the inventory record itself. Oops, that's stuff I might want to correct a little bit later on, but it's not critical at the moment. But I can see all my other different publishers I've got in the system. And then I've got an entry that shows me what are the number of titles. That's the number of SKUs. So in this case, in my blank publisher grouping, I have 983 unique SKUs, but of those, I only have 446 units on hand. So I might have quite a few zeros in that case. And this shows us the extended list, the extended retail, and then the cost basis. Now I do have this set by publisher as my 3rd level. So if I go forward another page or 2, where we go, right at the bottom, I'll start seeing the next grouping, my secondary, and then I'll have my primary further indented to the left. So the furthest indented is the publisher, the 3rd layer. You can see totals by section. Let me see if I can add a little highlight to my screen. There we go. That might be a little easier. So you can see in my report, I've got groupings by blank publishers, and then up level blank sections, and then a little bit further down, I'll have probably, hopefully not, blank departments. That's just gunk data if I do. So I can see in my grouping of items that I don't have sections on, that bubbles to the top, I can see I've got 1,365 of those. 742 are on hand. And then there's my numbers for my extended list, extended retail, and cost basis. I'm not an accountant, and I don't kind of work with those discounts all day long like you guys do. So I could only guess if 15,000 versus 14,000 cost is a reasonable percentage. Thanks, Mir. I saw that first question. Let's see. Let me jump to another page here. So this report, doing this flavor of summary report by those 3 layers, that still gave me quite a few pages, 38, 36. So you might even dial it up one more level and say, let's not worry about even department, or excuse me, publisher or section. I just want maybe one page. And this is a great one to start with if you're doing that analysis of, do my numbers jive? So here's a nice one single page showing me all my departments and then the numbers from there. So this might be the very first report you run, just as a great look at it. Maybe hand it off to your accountant and let them do some of those quick calculations. Maybe send it as an Excel spreadsheet, PDF. You've got a few options there. And then as you start to go, wait a minute, my music department, something's not quite lining up. That's not what I expect. Then you just kind of go back up a layer and say, okay, let's now delve into that particular department or section or media or any of those combinations. But once you do decide on, what format, whether you want the very detailed hundreds, if not thousands of pages long, still save it to a file. Or if you want more of a summary, you can do all those different kind of extremes and then in between too. Once you do the F11 print, if you are wanting more than just a simple preview, there's the print option. Or if you want to save it to a file, choose the output to. Just scooch this over a little bit again so you can see a little bit. And in this case, maybe I want to do an Excel file, or I could just do a text file or CSV. There's the PDF option. If you're really geeky, you might like the DBF option, and there's an HTML option as well. So you've got quite a few choices for getting that data out of the system into a storable, shareable piece of information. I'll just kind of do my general Excel file here. I do have to choose output to, and then what file type, and then where do I want to save it, and what do I want to call it. And I do that by hitting that little 3-dot button, the assistant button. That brings up this little save as window. And right now mine's just defaulting to the root of my Anthology folder right on my server. And maybe I've got a special folder that I've created to stash those things in. And let's just see. Let's just call this IMV value or something like that, or IMV status, whatever naming convention works best for you. So maybe I'll do summary by department. Yeah, maybe 2021. And then as long as I've got read-write permissions to whatever destination I had put in, it'll let me save. And if I flip over to my report, I should be able to find where I stashed that. And looks like we might have had another person join us. Let's see if I can find my report. I just saved it under. There it is. That kind of, pretty quickly really goes over, just that sort of at the very least, it would be good to run this report, the inventory status report, once a month. if you can, obviously end of close on December 31st, or a couple days later, that's okay. Just remember that's the one report that you can't go back in, say April, and run it for the value at the end of December. There is a way to get those numbers. That happens. Sometimes stuff happens. But I've got on the message board somewhere, if I can find that list, I've got on the message board a spot where I give you sort of a list of what are the reports or the settings that you might need to do if you wanted to try to recreate that value of your inventory. It should be pretty close. I wouldn't say it's going to be down to the very penny, because there's little bits that, something got lost, little things like that. Let's see, let's just do value, I think is the one I searched for. So inventory status report, finding inventory value for previous date. For those who are accountant minded, feel free to look at that and say, hey, wait a minute, you forgot about this value, or I'd love to see if my notes are as close as they can be to the best. But if you do have a chance to save off either the detailed and or the summary for that value report, the inventory value report, inventory status, excuse me, is what we call it. Save that off as close to the end of the year as you can. That's going to be a good picture for your accountant, for you, other things. There are other reports that are kind of complementary. We've added a few over the years. I'm not sure with the whole group we have here right now. Some folks are long-term lifers, maybe. Some of them you might be pretty new, but under reports, the other one you might look at is Business Center. That's another good one. I'm hearing from folks that that's kind of some people look at it the first thing in the morning, last thing at night, or once a week, just as kind of a eyeball view of what's going on in the store. So under reports, way at the bottom is Business Center, and there's two parts to it. It'll do some calculations when you first get in. This is actually doing live calculations right as it first opens. So here's my overview of what my inventory on hand, on hold, on order, draft POs open, my receivings kind of last month, last year, sales, vendor returns, that kind of numbers. And then the secondary tab, where we've added some stuff fairly recently, you can do sort of more summary type detail. In fact, let's say I wanted to look at how my different vendors have been doing for, maybe all of 2021, excuse me. Let's see if I've got enough chunk of a data. And this report, because it's trying to do turns on a 30-day monthly basis, it does want these from to be in whole month increments. So I can say for this past year, going by my vendor, I'll do F12 refresh. And then here's all my vendors. And it's going to show me a lot of different angles of information. The first few, if I can highlight these, the first few, the current on hand, on order, current value at cost, current value at retail. Those 4 columns are sort of at the moment you've opened this report. So if you say F11 print, save it off, just know that's kind of the moment you ran that report. And then over here, the sales at retail, or rather average on hand, that's starting on that one. Sales at retail, sales at cost, margin by dollar, markup percent, turns, and the GMROI, if I can remember that one, gross margin return on investment, I think. Those numbers are kind of the calculations. So we're showing you on the left what the current moment numbers are, and then based on the date range you picked, what was the average on hand amount. And we're doing that sort of on a 30-day turns calculation. So every day, every night that you see out, we kind of take a little mini snapshot of what the on hand was at that moment, actually kind of add it to a pile. And then at that 30-day turn, we calculated, divided out what was the average on hand for that month. That gets saved off into a table. And then here's your sales at retail, sales at cost, again, for that date range that you picked. You can sort the columns in here. You can do filtering. Let me switch my screen back tool. So I could sort by my turns. And this is testing data, so it's not going to look terribly great. I should use a store set of data. But you can see I've got, my general vendor called publisher. Again, testing data. I've got turns of 1 per 30 days per month. Other things I can do, sort by the vendor, sort by the on-hand, what's my biggest grouping of items. I've got a lot of items assigned to a certain vendor, 440 items, significant amount of my inventory value. I can do F11 print from here, and much like the other report, I can say preview it, actually print it to a physical printer, or like the other ones, I can save it to a variety of different formats. Excuse me. And I can do other things too. Probably the newest addition is the ability to say, show me this by customer. A good way to kind of do my end of year, who's my favorite customer. And I can go through and find these different customers and see, maybe I want to do a little promo. I can save off that list of information, stash it to a file, maybe send an Excel spreadsheet of names and or contact information through another step to my social media person so they can start working on a little news campaign. Business Center is another good report and a good kind of complement to end of year stuff. Lots of other reports. Let me clear my screen, get rid of that highlight. There we go. Other reports, of course, sales history is a good one. That one is always retroactive. It's history, so it can go back through the time. You could run a sales history report for just one day or for the last 10 years if you wanted. Same thing for the historical Z-tape. You can run that report. And the historical Z-tape is the one we kind of recommend for those questions of how much tax did I collect in a given date range. So same idea between historical Z-tape, sales history. I can choose a date range. I can do different filters and settings. One other thing we've added kind of recently is this account format checkbox. That is going to, what's the best way to describe that one, Jim? It's going to kind of make it so it's always the same exact output. So your checking tender will always be on line 5, no matter if you even took a check tender that day or not. That way you can have fun with maybe some Excel macros that are going to do fancy things like get that data in a certain format so it gets tossed over to your QuickBooks program or any number of tools. But there's a few folks here that I know do some higher level things like that. But I can say what date range I want. Maybe I want to only focus on a certain station or a certain user. So there's in any of our reports, you'll see there's lots and lots of checkboxes that can give you very different looking reports. So maybe take a moment to experiment a little bit, see what what it is that you're looking for that you might want to get out of that data. Let me go back and just do a big date range here. Day by day means show me or kind of output the data if I've selected multiple dates. Show me a tape per date. Good if you want the more detailed, full out, give me everything, or no, I just want sort of one grand total summary for my last quarter so I can do my sales tax report. So I can say, run this guy, and let's just preview it. So there's my historical Z-tape, and it shows you at the very top, sales are for, in this case, I did 4/28 through 12/28, so the last few months. And it shows me what date time I ran it on as well. But so here is sort of the summary view for a large date range, but shown in the format of just one particular tape. And then in the sales summary, about the last page, maybe second to last page, you'll see that's where we start showing what was the total taxable sales done during that time frame, the total non-taxables, what was the sales tax collected, and if you have a setup where it's like cities, state, bus tax, metro tax, if you have a multi-tiered tax profile, you'll see those reported there as well. Any shipping charges, voids, all that kind of handy information. That's the Z-tape, historical Z-tape, excuse me, for a certain date range. And that account format, let me run that so you can see what that looks like. This is fairly new. I'd love to see some folks start to use this and give us some more feedback. Let's just say, let's do hist Z. When you're doing things like an Excel macro, ideally your structure of your data won't change, so that if your checking is on line 2 on the 1st of the month, if you go to print this guy 30 days later, it should also be on line 2, so that your macro always looks in the same exact place and gets exactly what it was after. Find my most recent one. There we go. And I don't have a lot of sales information, so I'll have a lot of zeros in mine, but you can see my bankable tenders is my first column, and then I've got it laid out where it shows me each tender in the system, whether it was used or not in that date range, it's still going to show up. So I'll have a very consistent format from time to time that I run this report. That might be good for those of you who have accountants that want to get some of those other numbers. Aside from the receivable and payables, they might want to use this tool, the account format, to get that nicely formatted report every time. Sales history report, similar idea. You can see lots and lots of different options for making it look very different, setting my date range. And again, this is the one you don't really have to worry about when you run it. The one that you really do want to be careful is, or mindful of rather, is the inventory status. If you can, run that guy at the end of December 31st and close after they Z out for the night or before the next morning. Same idea here. I can really limit my sales history report by saying maybe I'll only want a certain department, but I want to focus on maybe the sections underneath that department, and then maybe under that even on the author. And in this case, I'll do let's do a summary report. I want just the new book department. And then under that, I'll want the totals by section, and then secondary totals by author. I want summary. I'll use condensed form. I don't really care about the AR sales summary at the moment. I just want everything. And now I can say print and preview, and that'll be a nice 1 to 2 page report of my date range that I picked. Again, we show you at the very top what were the settings that you used at the time. So I can see those different options, those different dollar amounts. It's pretty quick on those kind of 3 key primary reports that most people will tend to run end of year. There are lots of other reports, between the inventory status, historical Z-tape, sales history, business center. Those are kind of the top few. There are some enhancements we've made over the last couple of years, in case you've been here for a while. The sales transaction summary report now has options to show even extra information. In fact, so much information that we can't really fit it on one nice wide page. So you might notice if you pick the enhanced details option, you won't really get an option to fully print it. It's actually disabled. You'll only get an option to output it to a file because there's simply more detail there than we have screen width or paper width to print nice and neatly. In fact, let's say sales trans. The sales transaction summary is a good one for, what was going on that day? How many, out of all the transactions, who was doing gift cards a lot? Or, what was the items that were being bought that day? Or maybe I need it for accounting purposes to see dollar amounts of sales by author. You can get quite a bit, but I already saved that off. Let me see if I can. Here we go, sales transaction summary. So that I did the extended detail, which gives me lots and lots of stuff. So getting that report, I'll have many, many columns of information down to things like the line item within that sale. This was a cash register sale. There's the transaction number. Was it a sale, a tender, a return, a gift card? tax, those dollar amount type stuff, SKUs where it was applicable. In the case of a tender line type, what was the tender, check, gift card, what was the customer code, dollar amounts, all the way over, I think into author, section name, quantity sold for that item, a few other bits and pieces. So that report's a handy one. Not necessarily one that has to be run all the time, but certainly one of the handy ones. Let me just minimize that. Other flavors of sales transaction summary are, I think another one we did kind of second to most recently is showing it by customer. And that one is small enough to fit on a page. So here I can see what were the number of transactions I've done for my different customers and what was the dollar amount for those customers. That might be another handy one to run for, who's my favorite customer.